Chat as part of the India Mobile Congress. The session today is about the digital inclusion, connecting the underconnected, right? As part of this topic, we are fortunate to have with us Mr. Anjan Shah, who is a client director for the service provider business within Cisco, and he's part of Cisco India and the SAARC region. Welcome, Anjan. Welcome to this talk show.
No, thank you so much, Chaitanya, and everybody for giving us this opportunity to represent such a wide, diversified, but the most important topic. And I think pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons, and I think it would be very, very intrusive to have the discussion. Thank you so much, Chaitanya.
All right. No, thank you so much, Anjan. I think the topic is very interesting and wide-reaching as well, because, like you rightly said, in the pandemic, this is truly something where pretty much every strata of the country was affected and needed technology and connectivity to be able to function effectively, right? From basic issues, including financial inclusion, payments, to education, to healthcare, to even getting the vaccination, right? So to that extent, I think it's a very opportune moment to be having this conversation about what do we see in terms of digital inclusion, and what we see as the path ahead for that. So as part of this, I wanted to touch upon a couple of topics, Anjan, get your thoughts on that. One is the whole aspect around the connectivity, right? So even being able to connect to the internet and various services, what are the technologies evolving in that space? The second part would be around the access, right? Ability to access in terms of the devices, affordability, etc. And then third part is about what are the kind of enabling infrastructure, funding, or mechanisms that we see, which would really help the cause of financial inclusion or digital inclusion in this case, right? So that was the structure. So the first one, like I said, I wanted to talk about connectivity, right? About what are the different technologies available. So in the recent past, India has been the poster child of the telecom revolution, right? In terms of the sheer scale of telecom services reaching, wide parts of the business, and giving, phone access, feature phone access to a large set of the subscribers in the country. And since then, we've had the data revolution, right? We've had Reliance Jio come in and really expand the access and coverage of the mobile broadband to the extent where we have, for a lot of people, this has become their primary gateway to anything they want to do, right? Instead of broadband or fixed line or telephony, etc., this is their primary device which is used to connect. But in the next few years, we see a lot of innovations happening in terms of connectivity, right? We have the promise of 5G coming up. We have several innovations in the form of LP WAN, and we have NB-IoT and Wi-Fi 6 and other technologies coming in. And in the recent past, we also seen announcements about satellite-based internet as well, right? So we wanted to get your thoughts, Anjan, on how you see the connectivity, right, from a technology aspect. What do you see is the direction, the momentum, the trends, and how do you see this space evolving?
No, I think very well put upon and touch upon all the points, Chaitanya. But a little different perspective to what you just said, right? I think there were times where connectivity was something which was of profound importance. According to me, I think we basically had good roads, good infrastructure. We were always called as a developing nation, but as far as telecommunication is related, I can proudly say the way the entire industry has transformed itself, and I think pandemic cannot be a bigger test at scale than India, right? And I think reaching each and every individual, every consumer, every enterprise, be it MSME, be it SMB, be it enterprise, be it mobile broadband consumer, be it rural broadband consumer, or maybe a wireline broadband consumer. I think uh, you know I think India has really turned around its entire infrastructure and disrupted the industry and made itself at a global case where we were at 156th rank, and now we are in the top three, right? And I think thanks to the entire industry, service providers, ISPs, and all of them come together to see this disruption. And this, I'm relating back to your question on connectivity, that it's just not about connectivity, it's qualitative and quantitative. When I say quantitative, it's about the reach. When I say qualitative, it's about the quality of the service for that particular end consumer. And I think both of them have really seen a lot of shift. I will not say shift, I think probably a swing. When I look back 10 years and when I look back now, I think of course there is a lot to be done, but I think it is really well equipped in terms of promises been made across the board, whether it is industry forum or whether it is service providers or whether it is ISP providers, right? I think all of them really have come together to strive towards a common aim, which is say either connectivity to the core or whether it is connectivity to the subscriber. I think they are spanning across very well. And I think maybe we see 2025 as an inception point where, of course, the ministry itself has said that 2025 we would be a 5 billion digital economy, right? And I very proudly say that when they say 5 billion digital economy, I really aspire to see India having 1.3 billion connections done. And I think that is not possible if you do not have a well all round connectivity performance done by all of them. And I think that is very, very promising. And I am sure that with lot of push coming both from the government as well as aspiring spectrum of 5G, I definitely see 2025 dream coming true.
Okay. Oh, well said, Anjan. I think, like the old saying goes, right? It takes a village to raise a child. It takes the entire ecosystem to come together to, make this a reality about digital inclusion. So obviously, a lot of the attention, is about where do we go from here, right? With 4G, right? We've achieved a fair amount of penetration, connectivity, and access, right? But obviously, the focus of the industry and the telecom service providers is now on what's next, which is 5G, right? So on that, there's obviously a lot of discussions going on what is the investments required for 5G, what is the viability, but more importantly, what are the use cases, right? So, and it's very interesting that in India we have a dual market, right? A very, very dense urban market and a very sparse and very far flung rural market, right? So all technologies obviously start with the urban core, but then take their own time to reach the rural areas, right? So in this context, right, in the context of the rural versus urban markets and a capital intensive investment like 5G. So how do you see that playing out? Are there good use cases where you see this could, be a good use case for the rural market as well? Or how do you see this space evolving on the 5G front?
No, very good question, Chaitanya. And I think this is definitely a talk of the town, not only in India, back in US as well, to Europe as well. And I think top of the minds of all the players, right? See, I mean, earlier it was all about telecom industry. I don't think it's more to do with telecom industry. I think it is to do with digital inclusion across industry, and there is a reason why I'm saying so, right? I mean, if you see the entire gaming industry, according to me, technology was the one which gave birth to gaming industry, but according to me it's reverse now. The way the gaming industry is evolving, the way the content industry is evolving, is forcing the telecom service providers to be more agile, is forcing OTT to be more agile, right? And it is definitely wanting a real quality of service to be delivered to that end consumer. So when you talk back in terms of 5G use cases, I think it's the other way around, right? Every use case will have some definition of technology from a 5G perspective. Now, whether you talk about QoS, whether you talk about WBA till the home, right? I think it is every use case will be driven differently, and according to me, it depends on which country, which use case, which is the well equipped infrastructure to be laid out, right? And when you say 5G, I think India from perspective of 5G is quite ready, right? When I say quite ready is because Reliance Jio came up with a disruption on 4G itself, so it does not have anything to do with 2G and 3G at all, right? So for them, it's easy to, I will not say even migrate, right? I think they were 5G ready. It is about once the spectrum is in, what type of spectrum do we get? What is the contiguous? What is the non-contiguous band do we get? How the carrier amalgamation has to happen? That is all going to be done at the back end, and that's not going to take a lot of time, right? And if that is the case, right, I think 5G is something which I definitely call ready to take off. Coming back to use cases, I think there are a lot of industry verticals which are not been in an organized way. I think it's a very unstructured market. You whether you take industry vertical 4.0, right? I mean, industry is talking about industry vertical 4.0, but according to me, when we speak about industry vertical 4.0, it's much more to do with organizing an unstructured market with help of technology to make it much more structured, much more open, much more agile, and much more user friendly. And I think if something has to do with that, it has to be to be done with quality of service. It has to be done with speed and feed, and obviously it has to be much closer to that particular user and closer for that particular use case. So I think closer to the user and for that particular use case is very important from a 5G perspective. Giving example of agriculture, I think the way, I mean, predominantly we are still a developing economy, and agriculture is still our backbone. But if you actually see, lot of startups have come up with great ideas in terms of how can agriculture sector, because again it was unstructured, making it properly structured and then making use cases over and above that is definitely going to be possible with the rural broadband, which will be again fired by 5G, right? So when I say about 5G, it's an ecosystem, right? So you touched upon important point as technology, and when I say technology, 5G is one part of that entire I mean technology ecosystem. So again, with that 5G as a technology, when we come towards that rural broadband, it will be just speed and feed. But again, when you drive towards the mid sector of consumer, it will again be data driven. Again, you move to the top of the pyramid, it would be 5G backhaul as well, and that would be like private 5G. It would be more secured 5G. It would be 5G along with Wi-Fi 6. So I see range of use cases that can be driven, and according to me, the use cases will keep on evolving as we see more and more of not only 5G but proliferation of 5G along with Wi-Fi 6, along with home broadband, which is FTTH, FTTX coming into the picture. So I see perspective of a pyramid constituting of 4G, 5G as an wireless access technology. I see FTTH as a form of home broadband or office broadband or consumer enterprise broadband. And third important thing is how do we ensure to power digital inclusiveness across for MSME and SMBs, which is third important vertical of that particular pyramid, right? So I think if we can make good use case, which is driven to that particular end customer, that would really define how 5G would be successful. So we have seen last 4.5 years of how 4G really taking on. I think 5G is definitely ready to take on next year onwards. We definitely see 5G taking off in a big way in India.
Okay.
Back to you,
No,
Chaitanya.
thank you for that, Anjan. I think your second point of the pyramid, right? About in addition to wireless technologies, looking at wireline and specifically with the need for a enhanced quality of service, a high data throughput, we see fiberization and FTTH also is a big theme. And like you rightly said, there is the issue of last mile connectivity in FTTH, which is seeing a lot of investment, but it's a slow burn. And then even on the the B2B or the services aspect, right? We've seen, for example, fiber replace VSAT as the choice of technology for say ATMs and so on. But in the terms of in fiberization, right? So how do you see it either complementing or coexisting along with the wireless access technologies? If you could just give your thoughts on that.
No, it's a very good question again, right? And again, it touches back to the point of making an ecosystem reach to the consumer, right? And when I say ecosystem reach, it's not far days when we would be driving on the road with say 5G access and driving back in the office with wireline as an access, right? And when I say so, pandemic has given us that example, right? I mean, a lot of our near dear ones, we were all working together, they're all working back from home, right? And when they're working back from home, internet is now distributed. It's very clear internet is now distributed, which was much centralized, right? So that point of presence were centralized. I think the point of presence have gone quite distributed at this moment of time. And if you see, this has happened at scale in India, right? And due to that scale which we got tested during this pandemic, really gives a confidence back to everyone back in this country, that if we really want to achieve our next level, which is quality of service for that particular access technology, I think that entire ecosystem needs to come together. And when I say that, I was reading the statistics. We were just around 5 to 6 million in terms of broadband connection, which has doubled in pandemic, right? And I'm sure with 5G coming in next year, the shape and the aggressiveness of the rollout on the fiber and mind us, right? I mean, fiber rollout with real difficult demographics, geographical conditions in India, infrastructure maturity, infrastructure barriers. With all of that, we are still striving very, very hard, to reach to that particular 20 to 25 million, broadband subscribers. And when that happens, right, I'm sure the country is in right place, right shape, right form, to see real broadband even in rural sectors, right, to come up in a big way, right? And when I say that, it's the need of the hour, right? I mean, if you ask about our education sector, if you ask about our agriculture sector, if you ask about healthcare structure, right? I mean, huge investments are happening in terms of healthcare, and nothing better than technology in terms of connectivity it can serve. And if it cannot serve, the entire application layers, right, would really suffer. And for that, connectivity is real gold. I think data is gold, but according to me, the time has come where rural connectivity along with urban connectivity has to be given a paramount importance. And with the fiberization which is happening in the country, I don't think this is far off, right? So I think, summing up, right, your question, I think fiberization along with 5G access till that particular very home, and reaching each and every MSME and SMB to power up and help the digital economy grow. I think this is what I feel, that would be a very, very good promising future, for all of us.
All right, thank you. I think that's a good point, Anjan. In terms of these two technologies, in cases where it's a matter of just reach, right, or access, I think one of them, can provide the first level of connectivity, right, to the MSME, to the rural application, and so on. In other cases where both are prevalent, it would be guided by the use case, by the requirements of the user and the application, right? So I think that makes complete sense. To your point about the ecosystem, right? So one part is the connectivity, but the next part really is about the consumption, right? And for that, the accessibility is going to be a very, very important feature. And within that, I want to focus a little bit of time on the device, right? The access layer, the access, the point of access. And for many subscribers, especially in the rural, the demographic, the mobile is the first and the primary screen to consume all the applications on the internet. But we still have a situation where affordability remains a reason why we have a large number of feature phones which still exist, right? In recent times, we've seen some trends to change that, right? One, with the Make in India initiative and the PLI scheme, we see a lot of manufacturing shifting here, which will hopefully bring down the price points, make it more affordable. We've seen investments announced, for example, with the JioPhone Next, working with Google, right, to make a custom version of Android, which is really designed to power, low power, low cost devices, and also create the experience around it, right, in terms of less bandwidth intensive, less processing power intensive kind of computing. So on the device ecosystem, right? So what do you see as the emerging trends? What's coming up next? How do you see it evolving?
No, no. Again, from a device ecosystem, if you see, I mean, we have good, very, very good learnings, right? I mean, you mentioned about JioPhone, right? I think the very launch plan which they started with was on KaiOS, right? And they had their own OS to disrupt that. And now there is an entire ecosystem with, say, Google coming up along with Jio, Google even partnering with the likes of Airtel as well, right? And again with Make in India initiative, they are trying to ensure that this entire ecosystem becomes affordable, right? Like, we are the country with one of the costliest spectrum but the most affordable ARPUs, right? And I think it's going to happen again with the device ecosystem as well. And I think it again comes back, there is an opportunity for sure, right? An opportunity of consumption, opportunity of digital inclusion. When I said opportunity for digital inclusion is when you said about this, 2G handsets, right? I think over 200 million of them are definitely up for consumption, right? And these are typically the users which will help in really helping the technology to go and proliferate till its very base, right? So India is a country where you will definitely get scale, and that's where economy of scale will work, right? So imagine, right? I mean, you had 300 million and you had smartphone penetration, and now you have 900 million to a billion population, and that needs to be served, and that gives a huge opportunity. And I think the leadership, I think the forum leadership, the industry leadership, the government leadership, all of them together has understood the importance and the time to bring this back to the market and make the ecosystem work. I think it's quite well. Of course, I mean, it can be 6 months away, but according to me, all of the efforts are getting towards making the access and the device, ensuring that it is getting proliferated till it's very use, to swap out this entire 2G base, right? And why should I limit it to 2G base? Probably it might swap out to a great amount of 3G base as well. And I think I would be very happy and proud, in telecom industry player, while to say that India would definitely lead this transition, and it can shoulder to shoulder say that, with the likes of the developed ecosystem economics of even US, I think we stand quite tall, and I think we are very very proud about it. And again, to bring your last point, device ecosystem is one part of this entire ecosystem. I think it's more important to ensure that that point of presence for that technology to serve that consumer, to have that handset ecosystem till the last, is of equal importance. And I think everybody in the industry is working towards that, to generate and ensure that multi service edge is getting designed. So whether it is wireless technology or wireline technology, or to serve to that particular closest enterprise, all of them would be on this multi-service edge. So I think with agnostic handset ecosystem, with multi-service edge, and with automation all throughout, from connectivity of core back to the cloud, I think this is formulating the easiness to ensure that the 2025 dream comes true.
All right. No, excellent perspective, Anjan. So I think, we've talked about the connectivity, reaching the points of presence close to the consumer, where it's being consumed. We've talked about devices. Now, the next part would be about the tariffs and the accessibility. Now, clearly, like you said, we have among the lowest tariffs in the world, right, when it compares to, data consumption, or, even voice services and so on. Now, the question remains is this something which is viable and sustainable, right? We've seen recently tariffs started to increase, the ARPUs are trying to harden up a bit, etc. And obviously, we have the matter of the investment into 5G, right, which would need some payback and ROI as well. So, do you see access and, the existing affordability of telecom services continuing to be a driver for growth in India?
Yeah, definitely. And according to me, very, very rightly put, right? I think affordability is a behavioral analytics in a brain of an Indian, right? And we always work on comparative analysis, right? What is here, what is there, what prices available on Amazon, what prices available on Geo, what price available on Airtel. It's a comparative analytics which goes on each of our Indian brains, right? And I think if you actually see, just a weird example, but I will like to compare that, right? I mean, if you see the content, or if you see the television or the cinema, intrusiveness even in the rural, it's quite high, right? I mean, and just think from a perspective, you back in your hometown and you still have a cinema. It may not be as fabulous as maybe in an urban area, but it is still there, right? People don't mind paying 150 bucks for 3 hours for that cinema. But when somebody wants to rationalize that fares, everybody feels that 20 rupees increment is a huge increment, right? So according to me, it's important to understand what is the need of that particular telecom infrastructure, or what is the need of the telecom connectivity. According to me, it's the fourth important pillar, right? I mean, like you need to have a house, You need to have a connectivity, and you need to have a quality connectivity. And if you have to have a quality connectivity, you need to at least, I will say, not incentivize, but at least fulfill the very very basic demands of our service providers. And according to me, the tariffs are not that high, right? And if you actually see where do we really spend money, is not where it should be cheap. I think it should be rationalized where you really get quality of service, right? And I think quality of service would be directly relative to convenience, and convenience would be directly relative to the way people would like to pay back. So according to me, if you see the recent trends, the yearly packs are very very attractive, and yearly packs are the one which everybody is subscribing to. I was seeing the trends where earlier the yearly packs were subscribed at only at 11% across industry. Now I'm seeing 33% are yearly pack subscriptions, which itself is proof in the pudding that people are giving connectivity a paramount importance, and that's why telecom is a very very important part of the entire digital inclusion.
All right. No, I think great perspective, Anjan, because like you said, telecom spends are no longer a discretionary spend, right? It's become like a core or a must-have kind of a spend. I think there's a famous quote of taking the roti kapda makan and then adding internet to it, right? So it's become as essential as that. So I think your point is at least spot on that while we see tariff increases in the short term, for the subscriber, considering that this has become a core spend, core requirement, the trade-off is the increased cost vis-a-vis better quality of service, right? So I think that's a trade-off that they would take, any day, right? Essentially, what you're saying, that makes complete sense, and I think especially in the context of the recent pandemic and how it's become central to everyone's life, right? Be it in terms of education, be it in terms of financial services and so on. I think it's no longer a matter of people not subscribing if tariffs harden, but rather it's become central to how they consume everything from entertainment to education to healthcare to etc. Right?
It's very relative, and we at Cisco definitely feel, right. It's a theory of barriers to need and need to addiction, right? According to me, it's more of an addiction now, right? It's not even remain as a need, right? I mean, if I don't see a Netflix serial before sleeping, right, it's become an addiction, right? And when it, I mean, addiction is good and bad as well, right? So I'm not talking about a bad addiction. I'm talking about a good addiction, and according to me, quality of service is definitely a good addiction, right? And that's how I will like to sum that point which you just mentioned, Chaitanya.
All right. I think now coming to the third pillar about what are the enablers, right, to actually accelerate this trend or improve the inclusion further. Like you said earlier on, that with this pandemic where people are working from home, and a lot of the work from home has happened not just in their base office locations, right, but rather in their hometowns, etc. So I think the internet access has been fairly well distributed, right? It's no longer like your point about centralized or confined to well connected office spaces, but pretty much distributed across the country. And obviously, regulations are catching up as well, right? So initially, the terms around the ISP and what services can be enabled, from home, etc., were modified, but the regulatory environment has caught up, and we see increasingly that the trends uh, with this kind of access, right, to a large parts of the country, the hope is that the startup revolution, which is currently underway, will also similarly move from being urban centric to actually, germinating or originating in the heartland and really transforming large parts of the industry, right? So, any thoughts there on what are the kind of enablers around this, right? So, for example, startups and funding and access. What are some things that you see would really help the cause of digital inclusion?
Yeah, I think you very rightly pointed one thing, right? As pandemic has really tested, the networks at scale, right? And it's no more centralized, right? It's quite distributed. But what is more remarkable, that the amount of the elasticity that was been brought into test is phenomenal, right? I can tell you for sure is that even the developed nation, right, took some time to really scale to that particular requirement. I mean, talk about I would be little candid, right? Talk about 1G connectivity at home back in any developed nation. I think we brought it much faster than anybody else, right? I mean, we have 1.2 billion population to serve, and according to me, it's like 1.2 billion small offices to be served, right? Because you have work from home going for yourself, you have work from or education from home going for your kid, you have some sort of video conferencing going on with your grandparents or parents talking to somebody at the other part of the world, right? So it was actually serving four or five different human beings in a same house, right? But it is equal to 1.2 billion small offices to be served, right? This itself is the proof in the pudding that if you have 1.8 million route kilometers of fiber which is already penetrated in India, with about double to be done in next 2 or 3 years, I think that is absolutely the right way to look at it, and that would get complemented with a good device ecosystem, or I would say affordable device system, coming in and absolutely ensuring that you have the right device, you have the right connectivity, you have the right complementing connectivity, which is very important. And of course, at the end, the most important use case to be served is to ensure that digital inclusion helps all this MSME and the small businesses to really flourish. I think GDP is a very good example, right? I think it is up 8.4%, and if it would not have happened without a good quality of service connectivity coming in the picture. And I really appreciate, I have seen Reliance very closely, and of course Bharti catching up as well. But I think the way they really disrupted the industry, I think 5G will enable them to disrupt it in a very different format. Where I say different format is the way they reached each and every consumer. This time it's going to be consumer enterprises. This time it's going to be MSMEs. This time it's going to be a power of digital inclusion towards their rural connectivity, because that's unstructured. So if the bottom of the pyramid is going to be solved, the top of the pyramid will definitely be taken care. So I think it's the power of bottoms up, and that's going to really thrive and drive us, according to me.
Okay. No, it makes complete sense, Anjan. In fact, to your point about bottom of pyramid, right? Obviously, clearly we've established that the demand is there, right? Because the use cases, the access, the need is now clearly established. Now, I think we need to think about what are the supply side constraints or enablers around it, right? One part is now funding. I think with the recent tariff increases and the economy rebounding, I think financial viability is no longer a big concern, right? So the investments can come. And we also touched upon some enabling initiatives, right? Like, for example, Make in India. And I think, like we were discussing previously, it's about how do we shift the narrative from, Make in India to Grow in India, right? So how do we incentivize, further investments and become a virtuous cycle, right? So on the supply side, on the investments needed, do you have any thoughts about what is it that will really, transform this further, accelerate this further, and what is still perhaps required?
No, I think at Cisco we definitely think, right. I think Make in India is extremely a very good initiative by the government. But to ensure that the proliferation of the benefit of Make in India lies in growth in India, right? And when I say it lies in growth in India, is because growth in India would be the execution phase to ensure that everything good that we are doing with Make in India really reaches to the needy. And the success lies when it reaches to the needy. And that's what I relate back to. My dad used to always narrate, right? I think we were around we had around 63,000 telephones only in 1947, with 340 million of population, right? Now if you actually see and relate it to a so-called divide, is around 900 million over 1.5 billion, right? So I think we are improving at a very dramatic space. And when I say at a dramatic pace, is because we all need to understand one thing, is to ensure that fiberization takes it next step. Of course it cannot be at the pace of wireless, because you need to ensure that you need to trench, there is road infrastructure, there is power infrastructure, all of this needs to be taken care. I'm definitely very happy because government is taking all the right steps to ensure it's like more than a single window clearance type of a thing, for lack of better word when I say that. But it is ensuring that it is really ensuring that digital inclusion along with make in India, to ensure that it is reaching the needy, right? And I definitely see that the growth in India would definitely happen, because when you power all this MSME, SMBs, and I keep coming back to them, is because that is the future, right? And of course, our great ones, which are our developed industries, are already doing well. Automotive with more AI and ML, interactive, virtual reality sessions, when they drive a car, that is going to be only and only met when you have good infrastructure. So when you make good gears with Make in India, ensuring that it has been taken to the needy and every use cases, taking it till agriculture broad based, taking it till education use cases, ensuring that the video conferencing is of good quality so that it gets adopted. All this is finally going to ensure that growth in India can be done, whether you're sitting at home, whether you're sitting in an office, or whether you're sitting abroad, right? I think good digital connectivity inclusion is the only way we can move forward and ensure that our dream of 2025 comes true.
Excellent. No, I think completely agree with you, Anjan. I think we've covered a lot of ground around the opportunities, what we see as trends, and I think the outlook is, very, very positive and bullish, right? But I think maybe at this point it's worth also talking about what we see as potential roadblocks or hurdles or concerns in this journey, right? And as we've seen in the pandemic and afterward, two things come to mind immediately, right? One is about the tech supply chain, right? So, disruptions in supply chain, and, is that going to be a roadblock for us? Obviously, Make in India has started, but we have a long way to go in terms of being uh, technologically self-reliant. And the second aspect is very different. It's about when we have technology and connectivity, which is so ubiquitous. Should we be thinking about aspects like data privacy and cybersecurity and so on? And will that be a challenge for us, as you, like you said, to achieve our dreams, right, of 2025?
No, I think to a very important point which you touched upon, right? I think while we grow at scale, right, and we are becoming more digital in terms of even our payments being made more digital, transactions being made more digital, say whether ordering of any type of consumer need is becoming more digital. I think security is of paramount importance, and of course, I mean, that is a part of our core strategy as well. I mean, we are doing everything we can, even as a partner to India. And I mean, Cisco has one of its largest R&D base outside San Jose, and that is India, right? I mean, we have more than 18,000 engineers working there and around to ensure one thing, which is when we give connectivity, it should be of good quality, and we ensure that that good quality of service has been backed up by a very, very robust security ecosystem, right? And when I say robust security ecosystem, whether it is handset or whether it's an end device or whether it is network, right? We cover each and every part of that as a part of our overall security framework, right? And digital inclusion is only half baked if it's not secured, right? So you have seen failures across, right? I mean, we take some of the developing nations, even their banking sectors and their banking transactions, we have seen day in and day out, going through this type of disruptions. But I think, thanks for the entire pandemic, I think, because of very, very strong vigilance, very, very strong ecosystem, and a good framework, I'm sure I would touch about the semiconductor shortage in a short while. But I think from a security framework, we are good. There is a lot of work to be done to proliferate what we should be focused on. How do we ensure that connectivity and security goes hand in hand and proliferate quite deep? I think that is going to be our success mantra. But definitely a good ecosystem exists. Ensuring that it goes deep is of paramount importance, and that is what I will urge each and every one of us in the industry as well, that we should ensure that when we talk about good quality of service, it's a secured quality of service, secured internet, secured transaction, and secured reach. That is what we should all focus upon, and that should not be left as an afterthought. coming to your point on semiconductor shortage and chip shortage, of course, I think that is one of the deterrents. I think that pandemic has brought. Of course, it brought a lot of realization, but I think one of the things which not only India, I think it is across the globe, it is across the industry that you are facing challenges, right? And I think one, of course, we can keep complaining, but of course, yes, like steps for Make in India, which I think it will still take another 3 to 4 years to reach to that global arena. But till then, right? I think a start which has already been made, it's a good start. We will still have to depend on global supply chain to help us to our need. But I think what is encouraging is that we have already made a start, and it's a firm start. And once we reach in next 2 to 3 years there, I think some part of India definitely we will be self-reliant. And I think that's where I say, right? I think 2025, I come back to that point. I'm sorry about that, but I'm quite excited. 2025, I definitely see that inflection point where we would be talking more than the basic necessities.
All right, excellent. No, I think Anjan absolutely spot on, right? So I think we've said this before as well that in many industries we look at what do we call as best in class or case studies to talk about what does the future hold for us. But in many aspects, especially around digital inclusion and technology, we are pretty much in a league of our own, right? As a country, both in terms of sheer connectivity, sheer adoption of mobile broadband. Our financial services and fintech is pretty much taken as a world class, which even developing or developed countries are now looking to emulate, right? So in many cases, I think financial inclusion and digital inclusion, we are pretty much trendsetters, right, as a country. So it's a question of what India does or the ecosystem does here would be something which would be applicable in many other geographies, right? There should be a template for inclusion in other developing countries and so on. So to your point, I think we're all excited about the 2025, where we go from here. How do we further this digital and financial inclusion? Because a few years back, it would be hard to imagine that some of the transactions which are being done digitally today, right, including at your neighborhood shop to service providers to daily help to services, pretty much everything is becoming digital, and in a very very short span of time. What has taken countries several years is something we are seeing in a matter of quarters here, right? So I think the future is definitely very exciting. And thank you for sharing your thoughts, Anjan, and your perspectives. Obviously, in Cisco, you've been sort of the backbone for connectivity for many years now, and you're at the forefront of seeing this transformation happen, right? And with your responsibility as we're looking at service providers, which is the most important cog in the wheel, right, in the ecosystem here. So thank you for sharing your thoughts, Anjan.
No, no, thank you so much, Chaitanya and entire IMC team, right, to give me this opportunity to, share our thought process and share our vision that how do we want to partner and how do we really want to see the execution. We are waiting to see how well we can execute on this dream, right? I think as far as planning is concerned is of paramount importance, but we at Cisco definitely think execution of that vision is of much more importance because that will ensure that it will reach the needy. And when I say needy, I am also needy, right? I want good connectivity at a good price, and that can only happen when it reaches economy of scale.
Well said, Anjan. I think to your point, we're at a point where the economy is rebounding. Now it's time to execute, right? We have a lot of potential, a lot of initiatives underway, but now is execution, right, where the rubber meets the road. So absolutely, and looking forward to seeing what the future holds, both in terms of connectivity, in terms of service providers, in terms of Cisco partnering them. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for watching this fireside chat. That's me, Chaitanya from KPMG, and Anjan from Cisco signing off.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to this panel discussion on digital inclusion, connecting the unconnected. Joining me today is a very illustrious panel. I'm very pleased to welcome my panelists for this panel. First up, we have Shri Sunil Kumar Singhal, who is the DDG DS from the Department of Telecommunications. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Uh, After that, we have Mr. Abhishek Singh, who is the President and CEO of the National E-Governance Division and the CEO of MyGov. Welcome, Abhishek. Then we have Ms. Monica Desai, who is the Director of Public Policy at Meta Platforms Inc. Welcome, Monica. Monica, I think you're on mute, but glad to have you join us. And it must be really early in DC.
Oh, it's all fine. Thank you so much.
Sure. Then we have Ms. Vishakha Saigal, who is the VP and Head of Strategic Initiatives, Regulatory Policy and Research at Reliance Jio Infocom. Welcome, Vishakha.
Thank you, Chaitanya. Thanks a lot.
And rounding off the panel, we have Mr. Rahul Vatts, who is the Chief Regulatory Officer at Bharti Airtel and also the Director of OneWeb. Welcome, Rahul.
Thanks, Chaitanya.
Hello, everyone, and glad to have you join us today. And we have a very interesting session ahead and looking forward to getting all your perspectives. We're very fortunate to have a panel which comprises different stakeholders in the industry, cutting across the government and regulators, the telecom operators, and the platforms and the applications as well, right? So we're looking forward to very insightful discussion. At the outset, in terms of introduction to the topic at hand, as a country, as a market, we've made huge strides in the field of telecommunications, especially in terms of mobile connectivity. We're among the largest markets globally in terms of mobile subscribers, and also largest in terms of mobile broadband and data usage on mobile. So obviously we've made a lot of progress. It's been an exponential growth, and the industry has really come together to make it happen. As we've seen in the last 2 years with the pandemic, there is a significant transformative potential in using mobile connectivity and mobile devices across different use cases. We've seen examples of healthcare with, for example, the vaccination program, the Arogya Setu, etc. We've seen a lot of opportunities in agriculture. We've seen education where most children are now getting used to a world which is hybrid in nature with e-learning. We've seen significant advances in financial services with fintech and UPI. We've seen a lot of progress in government services, and clearly we've had e-commerce and entertainment with OTT, etc. So clearly, once people are connected, there are significant use cases which really add value to their life in terms of essential and discretionary services. However, we do have issues around access. We still have access issues around the rural versus urban divide. In the recent past, we've had several startups using different technologies like vernacular, etc., to increase the access. However, we still have a long way to go before all of Bharat gets connected. At this stage, it's important to discuss what should be a roadmap for the future. How do we build a very digitally inclusive India with obviously participation from across the industry and the stakeholders? How do we come together? And that is what we hope to discuss today as part of this panel discussion. First off, I'd like to start with a view from the government and the regulators, right? So, Sunilji, I'd like to start with you. As we see public services becoming increasingly digital, what are some of the steps which the government is taking? We've all seen announcements like the NDCP, the BharatNet, etc. But what are other steps being considered by the government to improve digital inclusion, improve access to these services for rural consumers?
Thank you, Mr. Chaitanya, for providing me this opportunity to interact on this important topic, which is at the heart of the government also, as we all of us know. The government is very much focused on digital inclusion and especially connecting the unconnected in rural and remote areas. And that is the reason that recently the Prime Minister gave a clarion call to connect all 6 lakhs villages with the fiber, which is the most stable form of connectivity. Now, that is as far as the intent of the government is concerned, but to implement that intent, a lot of actions have been taken in the recent past by the government. Some of them I can list down here also, like about 2-3 months back, a number of reforms were initiated, which helps in attracting the investment into this sector, and which in turn enable to bridge this digital divide, like reforms relating to the AGR, which now clearly defines the definition of the AGR, and that one change itself enables more than 1.5 lakh cable operators distributed across the country to start participating in the connectivity for the internet services also, because earlier they were facing the issues relating to the license fee, etc. Similarly, about 1 year back, the government came out with another innovative framework in the form of Pradhan Mantri Wi-Fi Network Access Network Interface PM Mani framework, which basically is to complement to the efforts of the existing service providers, where they are providing the services on macro basis, and then whatever micro pockets or small pockets are left out, those can be covered by such village level entrepreneurs or small entrepreneurs. So and they can develop the services as per the local needs, because we have to have a focus on all three aspects simultaneously: the availability, affordability, and accessibility. So availability part to some extent is being addressed through the BharatNet, but again that is for the backhaul. For the last mile connectivity, as you rightly said, we require the service providers who can connect the individuals. Now that is such vast area. Probably the macro service providers or national level service providers are making the best effort, and that is why today they are able to connect more than 800 million internet subscribers, more than 800 million subscribers out of 1200 million total subscribers. So that is one of the vast achievement. But yes, to connect the remaining, and then to provide the good quality of services in the rural and remote areas, we require some localized solutions also. So both the efforts are in that direction. Then the another very good and important reform which was undertaken by the government about 1 year back itself, that now the virtual network operators have been allowed to avail the pass-through for the input costs. So again, that is intended to improve the affordability of the services to the masses, and so that they can address that particular issue also. In addition to all this, what government focus today is that how can we make rollout of the services faster. So in that direction, the two major steps the government is already in the process of taking. One, how can we ease the ROW permissions for the stakeholders so that the infrastructure rollout is faster. And the second part is how can we enable individual service providers to enter into even rural areas where the backhaul connectivity is a challenge from a business case perspective. So the government is working to provide the backhaul connectivity, especially through the fiber or fiberization of the network through BharatNet also. And for that, certain steps are being taken to improve the service availability through the BharatNet. So all these, in my view, will go a long way in ensuring the digital inclusion. But this will address the availability and affordability part. However, for accessibility also, the government is focused upon on the digital literacy aspect, because lot of limitations comes because of the language barrier or even device availability and all those. So now lot many portals or the services of the government are being made available in the vernacular languages. So that will also, I'm sure, will generate a lot of demand and help in digital inclusion. So at this stage, this is from me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, sir. I think it's a very comprehensive view covering both policy kind of interventions like the AGR, the ROW, to also software change kind of initiatives as well. And the framework that you mentioned about availability, affordability, and accessibility, I think it's a great template to take forward as well. So, Abhishek ji, coming to you next, in terms of the availability aspect, right? We see obviously technology is always evolving, and we see newer technologies coming into effect very soon. We've seen fiberization, we've seen 4G now roll out pan India with wide amount of coverage, but you still have emerging trends around 5G, about LP WAN, about Wi-Fi 6. You have emerging technologies like IoT and so on. So, what are some steps which the industry and the government can take to ensure that these technologies as well, the benefits reach the rural India and the masses as well?
See, right from the beginning of the story of digital India and the digital governance, if you look at it, inclusion has been one of the primary focus areas. So, like when the National E-Governance Plan was launched in 2006, which later on culminated into the Digital India program, when we are laying down the networks and building the data centers and taking a mission mode projects, at that point of time, in order to ensure that when we go online, we don't create a digital divide in the form of digital haves and digital have-nots, the project like a common service center was launched. And what did the common service centers do? Because we realized that across the country, there were limitations of people in having either access to a device or access to connectivity or access to skills in having in accessing an online service. Toward this objective, they see the network of common service centers have been set up in almost every village. We have almost 400,000 of them across the length and breadth of the country. And what they do is that they provide services to citizens in an assisted mode. That there is an entrepreneur who is operating the center, and any citizen who wants to access an online service, whether to book a ticket or whether to do an e-commerce transaction or whether to apply for a public service, he can go to that center, he can pay the relevant service fee that is required and access that service. And the VLE delivers the service on behalf of the citizen. So over a period of time, they have really become very vibrant centers. They are offering telemedicine, they are offering educational services, and entire gamut of services are being offered through the CSCs. The other part which Mr. Singhal addressed was ensuring connectivity, because once we are offering online services, we have to ensure that every part of the connectivity, every part of the country gets connected. Whichever technology it is, it's a 4G, it's 5G or fiber. So the plan that has been laid down now is that 600,000 villages across the country has to be connected in the next 3 years, of which almost 150,000 panchayats or 200,000 villages have already been connected. And when these villages are connected, it's not that only the fiber is terminating at the end of the village. Village connection means a couple of things like the school, the primary health center, primary school or the middle school or the high school, then the health center, the sub center or the primary health center, the ICDS, the Anganwadi center as we call them, where women and pregnant women and infant children get nutrition, they get connected, the panchayat one gets connected, and also Wi-Fi services are offered. So then, or fiber to home. Anybody who can afford a service, it's offered on a fiber to home model at a minimal cost, so that people who want to get access to connectivity can get that. And that is transforming lives in a big way, because during the pandemic we saw the way online education grew or remote health grew up. Then similarly, e-commerce transactions, we are finding more and more weavers, artisans, craftsmen across the country and farmers starting to use these services. In fact, during the pandemic, the common service centers came up with a concept called e-Gramin store. E-Gramin store is like an e-commerce platform wherein farmers can buy fertilizers, they can get seeds, they can get access to mandis, and they can sell their produce also. So that ensured inclusion in a big way. The other part that we are working on is that like when we are delivering services through the mobile platform with the Umang app and others, what again we find that are these services only available to those who are having smartphones? To solve that problem and to ensure inclusion, to ensure equity, these services are now being enabled through chatbots and through a voice interface. So what it will mean is that using a voice command, you can access these services, but at the same time, anybody who doesn't have a smartphone or who has a feature phone or even has a landline can call a toll-free number and access a digital service by authenticating him over the phone. So it will be AI enabled system. So if somebody wants to find out how can he get a ration card, or if find out the status of his ration card or a PAN card or a passport, these services are going to be offered through a voice interface also. That showed that the 500 million people who in India who are yet to get onboarded to digital services, they will get a chance to get to come up on to get connected and to access online services. And the third most important part, apart from connectivity and devices, is the skilling part. Like, how do we make people digitally literate, and how do we ensure that they are able to access services in case they had a device or in case they had access to a connectivity? So for that, the government launched the PMG Disha program, which is seek to train almost 60 million people in using digital services, out of which almost 50 million people have been imparted this training. It's a small module which the National Institute of E-Learning and IT delivers, and then there is certification. So with this, the three-pronged strategy, the issue of inclusion is being addressed, which is very, very important. And technology can be, the way it's being implemented is technology agnostic. That as we go ahead and as IoT and more services, 5G comes in, the dependence and the services that will be offered through these the means will go much more. But if we have built in the right systems for ensuring that more and more people are able to take benefit of that, that will stand by us in the long run.
Okay. Thank you, Abhishek. I think it's very fascinating about how we are solving the last mile challenge, right? In terms of creating an access point through the CSCs, creating a more familiar, accessible interface through vernacular, etc., and then also skilling them so that they're able to take advantage of it. So thank you for that. Monica, coming to you next, we've seen about the last mile, right? And obviously, we've seen several technologies coming in terms of enabling last mile. We've seen FTTH, 4G obviously has good coverage. We have other technologies coming in. But one big area is Wi-Fi, right? Which is being seen as a good way for people to connect. And we've seen enablers for it, including the BharatNet access points. We've seen the PDO kind of concept coming in, PM money that we heard about. So what is your view about how can Wi-Fi play a role in terms of enabling that last mile access, bringing people online?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored to be a part of this panel and part of this group. And it's really timely, and I'll start by just noting it's really timely that this panel on digital inclusion and connecting the underconnected comes on the heels of International Day of People with Disabilities, which is really, a critical area of focus for everyone on this panel. And our part of our mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. And this means everyone, of course. And so I will talk about Wi-Fi, as you asked. Wi-Fi brings many advantages in terms of very low CapEx and OpEx, which is very easy to deploy, easy to maintain, easy to operate, easy to use, and cordless technology. It's also complemented by the device ecosystem, where Wi-Fi radio is available in almost all smartphones, tablets, laptops, and even desktops by adding a small dongle. Telecom operators around the world are utilizing Wi-Fi technology to offload data and call traffic to unlicensed bands so they can help keep the CapEx low and maintain the quality of service for more real-time applications. So Wi-Fi technology is based on IEEE 802.11 standards and operates in unlicensed 2.4 and 5 gigahertz spectrum bands. The Wi-Fi standardization and technology adoption activities are driven by multiple global organizations, and these standards keep evolving in order to help achieve better speed and support for multiple use cases. With ratification of 802.11 AX standards, it also operates in the 6 gigahertz band and referred to as Wi-Fi 6E, which is considered to be a game-changing evolution to bring Wi-Fi at par with 5G cellular technology. As Cisco has reported, Wi-Fi speeds from mobile devices will triple by 2023 to 92 megabytes per second on average. And the number of Wi-Fi hotspots will grow fourfold from 2018 to nearly 628 million public Wi-Fi hotspots globally by 2023. Excuse me. Wi-Fi 6 hotspots will be 11% of all public Wi-Fi hotspots by 2023. And by 2023, APAC will have 49% of all network devices mobile connected, and 51% will be wired or connected over Wi-Fi. And by 2023, APAC's average Wi-Fi speeds for mobile devices will reach 116 megabytes per second, which represents a 3.4-fold growth from 2018. Therefore, it's clear that Wi-Fi hotspots will play a major role in providing broadband services in the country. And I want to commend the unique, unbundled, and distributed model for delivery of broadband services through public Wi-Fi networks that's been rolled out in India under the framework of the Prime Minister's Wi-Fi Access Network interface. This framework takes forward the goal of the 2018 National Digital Communications Policy, creating a robust digital communications infrastructure, deploying 10 million public Wi-Fi hotspots, and the ambitious and important goal of enabling broadband for all by 2022. I also want to touch on Express Wi-Fi. Express Wi-Fi is a meta connectivity program that helps partners run successful Wi-Fi operations that bring under and unconnected people online. The program does this by helping Wi-Fi providers build out and monetize their Wi-Fi network in a cost-effective and scalable manner. Meta does not charge its Wi-Fi provider partners for use of the Express Wi-Fi platform. And as we all have understood, Wi-Fi has become a driver of economic activity and an optimally functioning society. We developed Express Wi-Fi, which is a software platform that enables the local service providers and mobile network operators to build, operate, and grow and monetize internet access over Wi-Fi in ways that are more sustainable and scalable. And in India, Express Wi-Fi is now commercially available through hotspots across 11 states, 11 Indian states, including Jammu, Karnataka, Punjab, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, and others. I want to also end by pointing out, in a recent study by Professor Rekha Jain, it was estimated that the economic value of Wi-Fi in unlicensed spectrum bands in India, in terms of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and direct contribution to GDP, would be 1.3 trillion rupees, which is nearly 6% of the projected GDP in 2025. The economic value rises significantly from 2020 to 2025, showing almost a fourfold increase. And mobile data offloading would account for nearly 81% of the total economic surplus of Wi-Fi by 2025. So there's so much more to say about Wi-Fi, but I will stop there. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Monica. Thank you for walking us through the different Wi-Fi standards, what's coming up, and how with Wi-Fi, which is ubiquitous now across devices, how can that prove to be a game changer in terms of connectivity? On that note, we've heard different topics, different ways of connecting the last mile. But I think one, recent and hot in the news kind of a technology is something which is not terrestrial, right? So we're talking about, satellite broadband. So Rahul, at this point, I wanted to ask you about your views about how does satellite broadband, what do you see as the future outlook for satellite broadband in this country? How does it compare with the existing networks we already have? Obviously, there is a big divide between a very dense urban market and a very sparse rural market. But we've heard different technologies like, we've heard Wi-Fi, we've heard LP-WAN and so on coming in. So how do you see satellite broadband, being part of this mix of technologies?
Thank you, Chaitanya and the IMC for this invite. Let me start by saying that space is the new growth frontier for mankind, from interplanetary travel to setting up broadband networks in the sky through LEOs and MEOs, with the aim to connect everyone to a better future. In India, under the visionary leadership of our Prime Minister, government has unleashed very bold reforms in the space industry, and these include, setting up of the regulator of called InSpace, and also encouraging participation of the private enterprise through various initiatives under Ease of Doing Business plan. Well, India today is just 2% of the global space industry, which is like $360 billion. So we have got a really long way to go to make space industry come to India. Why this need of space industry is what I really like to address today. And the fact is that today half of the world still remains connected with less than 10 Mbps of speed. right? And there are large parts which are around 20% is not even connected, right? That's two big factors why satellite, is getting a new look in terms of broadband connectivity. Number three is that the way the businesses are moving. Nearly 80% of our businesses are now using shifted their computing to cloud, right? So there is an increasing use of broadband, and the need for broadband is much more omnipresent all across, and that is why I think the satellite and the space communications is getting a completely fresh look. So I think that's the background of this particular thing. Coming back to our own country, I think the NDCP or the National Digital Communications Policy is quite path-breaking. I mean, it was able to visualize specifically in the strategies to increase broadband penetration that there are both terrestrial and satellite routes to achieving this connectivity, and hence, it recognizes it as a valid technology path to achieve the connectivity. Add on top of this entire structure which the PM has created about Digital India, I think the connectivity is the foundation of that entire platform. And if we have to reach to hitherto uncovered areas, to deserts, to mountains, to large parts of tracks, and I'm talking about deep interiors, sometimes in belts like Northeast, in Arunachal, in deserts across the country, in central parts of India. The only way to reach some of these areas is now to really spread out through satellite, which is, as I said, a recognized path for our growth. Now, specifically for rural and remote areas, we as mobile operators also had the challenge to reach there. And one of the biggest reasons why we have not been able to reach there is the challenge on the backhaul, which still date actually remains a big technological challenge in spite of having several initiatives like BharatNet, etc. We still have not reached to all the locations. That is why I think players like OneWeb, with the LEO technology in the low Earth orbit, are really best positioned to be able to reach to these areas. I think the satellite capacity and the broadband capabilities is going to be a game changer versus fiber or a microwave backhaul, which is currently present. And the telcos in general can use the satellite connectivity for backhaul to supplement broadband rollout, and also reach geographies and also give really a fiber-like experience now with newer technologies being available. So for these unconnected areas, the problem of ROW, which is by the way also present in urban areas sometimes, is going to be effectively addressed. I think the biggest push for satellite is coming because the latency, which has now dropped to less than 50 milliseconds, right? And that action is actually enabling large part of the journey to happen on 4G and a 5G like experience. And that I think is the real application which is now happening through the satellite particular broadband which will be available now. So I think that sort of a use case and that sort of backhaul is really going to spearhead the next generation of the broadband growth. Of course, we have teething troubles as in any sector. We have issues around how fast are we able to access the approvals for these sort of services. What will be the sort of a spectrum coordination in a harmonized manner, which we can work through ITU regulations. How do we actually reduce the complexities of approvals like NOCC, etc. And finally, what part does the government really see in terms of USO support for some of these projects? So I think that is basically the outline, but it gives a huge potential and opportunity for the country to really go ahead on the broadband journey.
Great. Thank you, Rahul. I think it's a very good perspective about satellite is not just a channel for the last mile to the consumer, but also a potential viable backhaul channel, right, to improve the capacity and throughput. So that's a great perspective. Vishakha, now coming to you. Obviously, Jio is the largest telco in the country by subscribers, and it's really transformed the access to the 4G coverage, right, both in terms of coverage and affordability, right, getting a lot of people online for the first time. And in recent times, we've seen a further push to convert the feature phone population to smartphones with the launch of JioPhone Next with a custom-built Android platform called Pragati OS and so on. But based on your experiences, what do you think are the barriers to digital inclusion? What are the reasons which are furthering this rural-urban divide and denying access to all there is to offer, both in terms of the connectivity, the devices, and the services?
Thank you, Chaitanya. Absolutely, if we look at India's digital progression in the last few years, thanks to concerted efforts of government and industry, we've made significant progress in improving access and coverage across India. If we look at 2G, it took 25 years to create 2G network infra across India. In comparison, if we look at the 4G trajectory, in just a period of 4 or 5 years, we've managed to build extensive coverage of 4G networks across every nook and corner of the country. Of course, there are gaps in access that need to be plugged, and as operators and government, we are working relentlessly to ensure that the remaining gaps in coverage are plugged. But if you really ask me, Chaitanya, I think we should be more concerned about the usage gap, which is way more profound than the access gap in India. This essentially means that despite living in areas having broadband connectivity, there is a sizable population which is outside digital realm, and they remain completely devoid of leapfrog opportunities offered by digital revolution. Uh, According to me, and as already highlighted by some panelists, lack of digital literacy and awareness is one of the biggest reasons for digital exclusion. This makes it very difficult and challenging to integrate digital technologies and applications in lives of people, particularly from rural and marginalized communities. Besides this, paucity of locally relevant content in digital services and device affordability are other major deterrents for adoption. If we to really foster digital inclusion, we must demonstrate utmost urgency and take concrete measures to tackle these barriers. First and foremost, we must considerably intensify our focus on digital literacy and awareness programs, especially targeting people from rural and disadvantaged communities. Uh, at Geo, while working on digital skill initiatives, we've realized that a one size fits all approach doesn't work. A digital training a toolkit that is designed for a state like Haryana will not work for the southern states. In order to maximize impact, it is very important to create need-based and customized digital training toolkits, which not only incorporate region-specific nuances, but are also adapted in native Indic languages. And needless to say, for promoting greater acceptability, along with these skill trainings, it's very important to create awareness around internet-based services and how they can actually address priority needs of local communities around online education for their children, access to government welfare schemes, information and advisory services around agriculture and livestock management, and so on. Of course, government programs like PMG Disha, which Abhishek ji also spoke about, are a step in the right direction. But given the widespread skill gap and the enormous scale that we have, we need renewed vigor and greater commitment from all stakeholder groups, government, industry, NGOs, and academia if we have to really overcome this barrier. Secondly, in order to further democratize internet, we need collective trust from all partners across the digital ecosystem towards creating locally relevant content and applications that are in tune and which can address the problems of local and marginalized communities. At Geo, we are increasingly leveraging new emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, IoT, machine learning, speech recognition tools, to create innovative solutions and applications in areas such as agriculture, livestock, health, and education, which are truly meaningful for rural communities. We're also working to incorporate vernacular aspects in all our solution application and collaboration tools. This has already started translating in improved adoption from rural segments. Lastly, and very importantly, addressing device affordability barriers is crucial for digital inclusion. While innovative low-cost devices like Geophone and other affordable handsets have definitely contributed in bridging the digital divide, there is a need not only to further enhance the ecosystem of affordable devices, but also look at a framework for subsidizing devices for people from disadvantaged and low income groups. Uh, Channelizing the USO fund of the government for providing device subsidy could be a very effective strategy. In fact, support from government in form of handset subsidy can actually help fast track the migration of around 300 million 2G subscribers to newer technologies like 4G, thereby driving digital inclusiveness in the true sense.
Great. Thanks, Vishakha. I think that's a good point about while we've seen increased access to devices, right, thanks to the PLI and other schemes, to your point about using USO kind of subsidies to further drive down the device, the upfront cost of getting online. So that can go a long way. The other aspect, which is now increasingly center stage globally, is ESG. And one of the key themes there is about gender diversity and getting participation from women, right? Both in terms of in work, in education, in pretty much every aspect of life. So, any views specifically, Vishaka, on addressing the usage gap from a gender perspective, right? What are the key drivers or what are the key enablers which can address the gender gap in terms of usage?
Uh, Absolutely, Chaitanya. Thank you for this question. This is a topic which is very close to my heart. Unfortunately, despite the digital advancement and progress, women have significantly lesser access to internet and digital technologies, and there is a prevailing gender gap both in terms of mobile ownership as well as internet usage. In fact, if we look at internet usage, the gap is as profound as 33%. And we've all seen how the pandemic has further amplified this gender based digital disparity and increased prospects of isolation and economic inequalities for women, particularly from rural and marginalized segments. We've also witnessed how lack of digital access is creating gender skew in very critical areas like education and COVID vaccination, with a large number of women being left behind. And even if we look beyond the pandemic, the ramifications of digital gender divide, they are very severe for a country like India, given the substantially low contribution of women in overall economic output. In fact, I was going through the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Index for the year 2021. India's ranking has further deteriorated by 28 places. It now ranks 140 amongst 156 countries. And one of the key reasons for this decline is decrease in women's participation in labor force. In light of this, it becomes very, very critical to bring women into mainstream of economy. And the fastest way to achieve this is by empowering them with high-speed connectivity and digital tools. So as a nation, it's time that we broaden the lens through which we look at digital divides and include the gender dimension in all the policy frameworks, strategies, and digital programs that are rolled out either by the state government or even the private sector. We need to set aside dedicated funds and well-established goals and targets for improving women's access to internet-based services. And in addition to the barriers, Chaitanya, with like literacy and affordability that I'd earlier talked about, it's also crucial to focus on community level awareness raising campaigns targeting the prevalent societal norms and cultural biases which prevent women from getting online. And last but not the least, a greater thrust towards developing women centric digital solutions and applications that can actually help circumvent the traditional mobility and social barriers for them, can go in a long way in narrowing the gender based digital divide. Thank you.
Thanks, Vishaka. Very important aspect you've highlighted, right? So, as we've seen during the pandemic, even in other countries across the world, we've seen a decline in labor force participation by women, right? Because of additional responsibilities around caregiving, etc. And that is something which obviously is witnessed in India as well. And there are other studies which have shown that increased labor force participation has a multiplier effect on GDP growth as well, right? So it's something which is, as we look at rebounding and look at the goal of a $5 trillion economy, this is an important divide we have to address, right, to make that leap. Monica, you mentioned briefly about other forms of inclusion, right? So on the access. So, for example, persons with disabilities. Now you've heard other panelists talk about how we are able to bridge the gap around literacy, around using vernacular, etc. But how can we also bridge the gap in terms of people with disabilities? How can we make the internet and connectivity become more accessible for them?
Oh, sure. And this is such an important topic because during the course of the pandemic, we learned that, for everyone, but especially for people with disabilities, access to family, the ability to retain independence, and the opportunity to access critical services online not only enables people to be more successful, but it's also key to overall health and well-being. And we've also learned, obviously, that while remote work can provide needed flexibility and accommodations, the technology and infrastructure necessary to work from home are not always available. And this piece is especially why this whole discussion is so important. But in terms of best practices and policy considerations, I'd like to highlight a few ways we focus on inclusion related to disabilities. At Meta, there's a dedicated centralized accessibility team to help define, develop, and distribute user accessibility requirements, training, best practices, tools, techniques, metrics, and other support to help advance accessibility work throughout the company. And at the same time, accessibility is viewed as a horizontal function within the company. And this means that accessibility is embedded into the different departments that touch the product lifecycle. And this includes design, research, and engineering, as well as policy and legal, which results in an important cross-functional effort to provide and promote accessibility in our products. And we also have a continuing dialogue with our disability communities that we work with. And this is really important. The feedback we receive from the community about our accessibility tools is critical in our work. So for example, Saksham, an NGO of people with visual impairments in India, conducted a focus group discussion on the use of social media as part of its research project with the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. And we worked with Saksham to ensure that the discussion included questions that were raised about Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. As another example, in September, we participated in a virtual disability dialogue panel in India that was hosted on Clubhouse. And co-panelists included a 15-year-old programmer who had founded a nonprofit aiming to make digital platforms more inclusive in an accessibility, as an accessibility tester as well. And with that background on our approach, I'd like to share a couple of the tools we've built to promote accessibility. First, we've focused significant efforts on improving the accessibility of videos and photos on our platform through captioning and automatic alt text. So the goal is for every video to have captions on our platform. And in addition to manual captioning tools, one of our biggest advancements related to captioning is investing in and leveraging artificial intelligence technologies to enable automated captioning. And this feature is really easy to use. The captions are generated just with the press of a button and can be viewed and reviewed by content creators and edited so that they have full control. We also have developed an award-winning automatic photo description technology called automatic alt text, which uses object recognition to generate a description of photos that enables people who use screen readers to hear a list of items that may appear in the photo. So earlier this year, we announced a significant update, which can now recognize over 1,200 concepts, objects, and places that can also provide additional context about a photo, such as the count of recognized objects and their positional information. As of August, more than 80% of the images displayed on Facebook and Instagram contain this automatic alt text technology. And it's supported in multiple Indian languages, including Hindi, Bengali, Gujarati, Malayalam, Marathi, Telugu, Tamil, and many more. Second, in addition to these on-platform tools and features, we're driving innovation and accessibility beyond the company. We co-founded and continue to be an active member of Teach Access, which is a collaboration of industry, academia, and disability advocates to advance teaching of accessibility in education to help design accessible software and prepare to make future technologies that are born accessible. So in other words, accessible from the very beginning. We've also created open source tools for accessibility and are working to make the popular React Native developer framework that's used in thousands of mobile apps fully accessible, which supports accessibility beyond just our own products. And this was really well received in the Clubhouse panel we did in India in the fall. And we're working collaboratively with leaders in the accessibility community and industry on standards for web and assistive technology through our funding and participation in the World Wide Web Consortium and ARIA AT project. So hopefully that helps. It's been really interesting to see these developments at Meta. When I worked at the FCC, I used to lead accessibility for the FCC, and it's really nice to see these programs and this emphasis in place and a growing emphasis in companies around the globe on this important issue. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Monica. I think some very, very interesting use cases of how we can use technology and artificial intelligence to really democratize access to to these kind of content and services, right? Through captioning and alt text and so on. Obviously, next step is
For
to
sure.
work with industry consortia to make it widespread, right? So people have access to it. Thank you for that, Monica.
Absolutely.
Rahul, I think we've talked about the availability to an extent. We've talked about accessibility to an extent. Just wanted a quick perspective on the affordability as well. Now, whenever anyone talks about the Indian telecom market, the most usual descriptions are about the lowest tariffs in the world, etc. Right? In recent times, there've been with changes in the regulatory framework, etc. Questions about long-term viability are slowly receding, and we've seen a recent hardening in prices. Do you think affordability will continue to be a driver for increasing penetration of digital services and inclusion, or do you see it becoming a barrier in the near future?
Uh, Thank you, Chaitanya. I think India is a very price-sensitive market. There is no doubt about it. And our tariffs, even after the hardening you mentioned, still remain among the lowest in the world. So I think as far as that goes, it's quite clear that there is a need for the operators to be able to sustain in this market, to be able to invest, particularly given the extent of digital infrastructure which is required to be put in. And for the inclusion purposes which we just mentioned about. I think what is really motivating us are a couple of factors. And let me just name a few of them. The fact is today that data traffic growth is going by more than 60 times in the last 5 years. We are at around 18 GB usage by subscribers per month, and industry average is around 14 GB. Predictions are that we are going to be like 1,000 million active internet users, and most of them will be mobile. Also that there will be more than 2.1 billion network connected devices, and we might have as much as 40 to 50 exabytes of data per month, in next 5 years. Now, given that much amount of potential, also let me add a large part of inclusion, which I think is not covered today in the discussion, is about the financial inclusion, right? So today I was looking at the numbers. The digital payment transactions now are at around 18,500 crores per month, right? So that is the amount of scale we are looking at. And Mr. Singh mentioned about the number of CSCs which are now serving, going up to the GP levels all across, and then add up that Aadhaar situation of more than crores of people already being there on Aadhaar. So I think that sort of numbers actually drive you to keep on investing and to create avenues, and then drives the potential for people to be able to use the services. So till the time you make the services affordable, till the time the services are equally accessible to this large chunk of people who are there in villages, in not so urban centers, I think we have got the trick right. Having said that, sustainability is important because we are heading towards large network expansions. And I was reading a very interesting article the other day, where in Europe, for example, I heard that a lot of CEOs have actually written to Etno and say that actually a large part of data monetization companies might actually consider investing in the networks for future, right? So those are some of the things which are already being talked about to ensure that the services remain affordable, after all, to the subscribers. So I'm saying that the potential is driving. Affordability is going to remain sensitive, but sustainability has to go hand in hand now.
Great. Thanks, Rahul. Abhishek, if you're still on, just wanted to also get your thoughts on what else the industry and the ecosystem can do, right, on the topic of digital inclusion. Obviously, you've led the way in terms of creating CSCs and creating, the network of digital literate consumers and citizens. But is there anything else which, the industry can support these kind of government initiatives?
The industry, the one thing that is required a lot is to how do we make devices accessible, low cost devices accessible. So we have been working with the electronics industry in particular to, especially for online education, what we saw in the last year that a lot of education went online, classes went to Zoom and Teams and Google Meets, but that in urban areas, students had multiple devices, laptops, tablets, and they could access classes. Content the government provided through the Diksha platform, a lot of content was available. But in rural areas and remote areas, there was a huge shortage of smartphones or tablets on which students could access content. So for that, under the PLI scheme, of course, government has taken up initiative to boost manufacturing of tablets. But we need some investment from industry to in this direction. Can we make low-cost tablets, low-cost devices available with which students can access e-content and doing that? And once that happens, it will lead to a growth in other sectors also. Like once more students are accessing more content on devices, then their demand for data will also come up, and demand of quality content will also come up. So what we have seen during the pandemic, that content, yes, there were a lot of content creators who created a lot of content on education, and the government also boosted it up with the Diksha platform, and teachers took up to taking online classes. But there are many students who have dropped out of the schools, and especially girl students. Surveys have indicated that once they drop out of the school, to bring them back to the school becomes a big problem. So that's like the learning gap that we are facing in 1 year. This is a huge cost that to pay, and to do this, government and industry needs to work together. Government can give some incentives, but Indian industry manufacturers all need to invest more in providing devices that can be made that are affordable and made available across. So that becomes a very important part. The second part will be that even in the BharatNet project, the government now decided to work with private partners in order to speeden up the pace at which connectivity can be done. So while having a 600,000 villages target is all right, but to make the fiber really useful, we need to, the program is to work with private partners to ensure that they are able to take up the projects in the sectors, in the regions that they have been allocated to, and ensure that it's completed in a timely manner. And once that is done, then quality connectivity, quality services are provided, bundled services along with public services and private services that will really help push forward the connectivity agenda. So these are the couple of things that I think the industry can work along with government in order to push forward the inclusion issue.
Excellent. Thank you, Abhishek. I think we've started with Sunilji, your perspectives on what the government has done, what already is on the roadmap, and then we heard a variety of perspectives from our panelists about this topic of digital inclusion. We've heard some interesting ideas about to your point about availability, right? We've talked about uh, evolving Wi-Fi standards, which can really boost the access. We've heard about satellite broadband being a big and a new viable channel both for last mile as well as backhaul services. On the topic of affordability, we talked about how do we balance affordability in terms of the prices with the long-term health and sustainability of the industry. And we also heard about the accessibility, about how to make it accessible. We heard ideas about handset subsidies or lowering the cost of handsets, either through scale and investments, like Abhishek mentioned, or through a subsidy model that Vishakha mentioned. And we also talked about investments required to help bridge the divides around people with disabilities, the gender gap, etc. So, in conclusion, just wanted your take as well, Sunilji, on what else do we see as big enablers, right? Because this is a big challenge, not just for India but for most countries. But it is especially important in India, where we have a large proportion of people living outside urban centers. So we've already made a lot of progress in terms of initiatives. We have a number of initiatives already planned and launched. But how do we take the next step? How do we actually convert this into reality? What does it take to execute on this? So your takes, sir, please.
Thank you, Chaitanya. I think most of the issues have been discussed till now, but one additional issue which comes to my mind is still like demand side push is required. We have discussed a lot about the supply side issues in terms of availability or accessibility, but demand side push is required, and for that many of the panelists have already emphasized on the need for the content, need for the devices, accessibility, and all. But in addition to all that, what I have noticed is in India, specifically when we want to include the left out portion, we may have to specifically identify the needs or applications which can be digitalized, the government services which can be digitalized, because many times the need drives the subscriptions or the requirements. It is not always the supply side market which increase the adoption, but and the right is rightly, the government is rightly focused on digitalization of its all services. So, like we have seen in case of financial inclusion, governments were working on financial inclusion, but when government implemented the direct benefit transfer scheme, then lot many bank accounts got opened. So similarly here, whether it is the online education or applications for all kind of government programs, which are being made slowly online, and if those can be converted into a vernacular languages also, then probably that will drive the demand from the left out community, and the availability and affordability will be ensured with the steps which have already been taken by the industry as well as the government. So that should be able to ensure the digital inclusion of everyone in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunilji. I think it's a great point. In the startup or product world, there's a saying that if you build it, they will come, right? So it's all about creating supply, creating the product in the first place. And to your point, in many cases, while the product offering exists, it is the demand which will determine where it goes, how fast it's adopted, and how it evolves, right? Like you rightly said, in the as well. While the building blocks were already in place, it is that the tipping point comes with a big spike in demand, right? How do we get adoption going? And that is where I think the industry can play a big role in making sure there is sufficient use cases and demand being generated, which will take advantage of all these opportunities being provided. So that's a great point. And I think what we've heard from the rest of the panelists as well is that the potential is there. It is a vast untapped potential because we've heard the variety of use cases across healthcare, across education, across financial services, across commerce, across entertainment. So the use case is there, and we've seen startups try to bridge that gap of building for the rest of India, the bottom of the pyramid. But clearly, more needs to be done to make sure that the demand is generated and provides a viable use case for the supply side economics as well. So that's a good and a fitting summary, in my view, of the discussion we've had. So with that note, I'd like to thank all the panelists for the time in joining this panel today, for sharing their points of view. It was a topic which was very important, very timely, and which will have a big impact in the future trajectory of the market, of how we evolve as a country in terms of being more digitally inclusive. So thank you for the perspectives. Thank you for the insights. And with that, this is us signing off from this panel.